Welcome, everybody. My name is Cuss. I'm your host, and Daniel and Michael are my co-hosts. And today we've invited Dr. John Cabra and Mr. Nathan Schwagler into the Inner Bowl with us. John is a professor at the State University of New York, Buffalo State Center for Creativity and Change Leadership, where as part of a team, he focuses on teaching, assessing, and researching the science of creativity. John is an adjunct faculty member at JSOU. John also specializes in facilitating and accelerating scientific and interdisciplinary innovation as part of his work through knowledge innovation. His clients range from national funding bodies to regional universities and have included the United Nations, the National Science Foundation, the National Institute of Health, and the Engineering and Physical Sciences Research Council, UK. John has written articles, book chapters, and books in areas of business, technology, engineering, and creativity. And in 2017, he and his colleagues published their book, Organizational Creativity, a practical guide for innovators and entrepreneurs by Sage Publication. Now, Nathan Schwagler is a full-time faculty member at JSOU University, MacDill Air Force Base, where he leads courses and designs and facilitates applied workshops for U.S. Special Operations Command, the U.S. Department of Defense, and he also has international partners. In his role at JSOU, Nathan supports two unique teams, the Creative Problem Solving Group and the Design Thinking Group, with curriculum development, faculty-led instruction, and workshop facilitation. His primary audiences are U.S. Special Operations Command, U.S. Army Special Forces Command, Naval Special Warfare Command, Air Force Special Operations Command, and Marine Special Operations Command. His international military design and innovation efforts include the United Kingdom, Canada, Germany, the Netherlands, Poland, Lithuania, Hungary, Denmark, and Israel. Now, these two have offered their services to some of the most prominent organizations in the world, including NASA, Coca-Cola, Abbott Labs, the Tampa Bay Rays, Harvard University, Miller Coors Brewing Company, and even Converse Shoe Company. And today they're here with us in the Inner Bowl, so it is an honor.
Yes, we're very excited for the conversation today. But first, before we get started, a little bit about who we are and why we are here. Agitare is a community built of facilitators from across the national security and defense sectors who employ facilitated discovery, problem solving, team building, design frameworks to enhance the mission, innovation, and transformation efforts of their units, offices, and organizations. We seek to normalize facilitated discovery and design frameworks in policy and workforce decisions in national security by providing a venue for previously isolated innovators and enablers to build a community of practice, find and share support and motivation, and improve their craft. The Agitare core team pursues its mission guided by our values, which are foster a growth mindset, stay curious, act with empathy, demand inclusivity, and do the work deliberately. If you're not currently in the Agitare community, please consider joining us on Slack, where most of the interactions take place, and we will drop a link in the chat. If you are watching a recording of this and don't have the chat, please check us out online. It's agitare.def.org.
Hand it over to Nate and John. Thanks for being here.
It's really good to be here. Thank you so much for the invitation. It's exciting to find more about this community. So it's wonderful what you put here together, and it's great to have this momentum, and the group's grown. So thank you.
Yeah, I'll pile on there. Thanks for having us. I very much appreciate Agitare and what it does, what it stands for, the momentum that the core team has built, as well as the extended network of participants. So I appreciate that. Second thing I wanted to mention, there's a lot of familiar faces out in the audience. This is starting to feel a little bit like a reunion. I think John recognizes some of these faces too. So we have an interesting range of folks from what I can tell, from individuals who I think probably would like to incorporate a little bit more facilitation or facilitative leadership into their profession, as well as seasoned, no offense folks, but I'm looking at some people here who have 20 years, 25 years of facilitation experience. So this will be a really interesting and fun discussion to have, because I think we've got some heavy hitters in the group, which is fantastic, from industry, academia, defense, across the board. So this is going to be exciting. Before I hand it back to John to kind of kick things off with an energizer activity, I am obligated to mention that neither John or I, so we are contractors working for the Joint Special Operations University. and our views are our own and in no way represent the Joint Special Operations University, U.S. Special Operations Command, or the U.S. Department of Defense. So with that, John, do you have an Energizer teed up that you'd like to kick us off with?
So we use this term, and we use this in our title for this presentation, and that is the inside moves. And we borrowed from our colleague Roger Firestein on that. But one of the things I want to let you know what resonated for us in using that term, the inside moves, is that, you know, often we are, or in some cases, we're faced with this particular challenge in terms of an activity, and we're not quite happy with how it unfolded, or perhaps we're looking to do something to augment and get more out of that activity. And so the inside moves is really like this pivot, and a pivot that sometimes folks don't realize we're actually engaging in. Here's what I mean by this. So Nate and I are certified in Lego Serious Play. And so in my case, one time I brought to life an article that was deemed by folks as very dense. And so I didn't want to have folks to continuously perceive that article as dense, because it's a really important article with good information. So we brought out Lego. And so Lego, people were more involved with how to create the metaphors and the pieces and the model, the physical models to represent their mental model. They don't even realize they were engaged in play per se. They're focused on making this content come alive. And so that's what we mean by the inside move, this pivot. And so we'll refer to that a lot in this presentation. And so we've also provided like a framework to have you consider when you're putting together a course or a workshop, how to consider the ecosystem, you know, the climate in the classroom or the virtual platform, how to consider the mindset of the student, the mindset of the instructor, how to consider the process and the pedagogy, and what outcome you're looking for. And all those things are integrated. So we'll refer to our experiences using this framework on occasion. So, yeah. What we're going to do is we're going to share with you a link that's going to take you to Miro. But before we do that, let me just share my screen to share with you the exact warm-up that we're looking to share with you. So we just mentioned how warm-ups are really important. And this speaks to the one part of the ecosystem, which is about how to build up the climate, the climate in your classroom or their virtual space. So people start getting some really important signals. Hey, what this class is going to be about, what kind of environment am I walking into? And so, you know, some folks, there's a long day that people have, right, at work. And so they're coming in our classroom or a workshop. So this is the Energizer. So I thought, you know, let's meet people where they're at. And so I'm sure many of you have already seen that the military has released these videos of what they're considered these unidentified flying objects. I know there's another term now. So you see the GIFs there on the left-hand side. So I want you to put yourself in the mindset of a committee member of this welcoming committee. So now you belong to the welcoming committee, and now you know that these people, the military and the government, are tracking these unidentified flying objects. And there's extraterrestrials in that, and that's now being confirmed. So now you have the role and responsibility of welcoming these extraterrestrials. And so with that in mind, we're going to take you to, and you see there on the chat, the link to Miro. And I'm going to share with you where to go with regard to exactly what we set up for the Miro platform. And so I'm sharing my screen with you, and it's obviously you see the same GIFs that I showed you on the PowerPoint slide. You see the set of Post-its that we have on the left-hand side. So here's a couple things I want you to consider as you come up with as many ideas as possible, many options. I want you to challenge yourself to defer judgment. We're just trying to get as many ideas as possible of what you can do to welcome an extraterrestrial or a set of, you know, a group of extraterrestrials. And I want you to also push for as many as possible. So if you would please just find a Post-it or a virtual sticky note and begin to populate or write on it. And the way this works is just double click, where you can click once. And then once you see the cursor just kind of like going on and off, then that suggests to you that you could start writing as many ideas as possible. Again, you're on this welcoming committee. We're all the ways to welcome an extraterrestrial. And one of the things that we'll invite you to do as well, I see that we have like about 17 folks or a little bit less joining us. I'm going to invite just any volunteers to just say out loud some of the ideas that you're writing down on your Post-its. And let me tell you why why we're asking you to do that, because if you say them out loud and people can hear that, they can actually make connections off of what they hear. So that helps serve as a stimuli, right? So who would like to be a volunteer just to share out loud what you're writing down on Miro, if you would, please?
Carpet.
Great, thanks for starting us off. Good, the red carpet, yes.
I put that we could play them a 5-note song.
Great, keep them coming. Great, you got 2 volunteers and keep adding, because again, this helps with stimulating potential other ideas.
I put actually greet them with a smile, and I guess depending upon their height, kneel down to get eye level to greet them.
That's great. Thank you for sharing that. And
I find that bagels are always a big hit.
I had carrots and hummus.
I put a potluck of international foods.
Mm.
I would start a rock, scissors, paper game.
so let me just give hats off to the group, because this board just got populated really fast, and I really appreciate the volunteers jumping in there and sharing, because you can see how that's now helping others to connect as well and share with other ideas. Good. All right. And so here's the last few seconds. I'm going to invite the group. This is just a way of getting the group to work as a community. And this is building on what I just said a few seconds ago as a means to build off of the ideas that people have already placed on the board. I'm just going to invite you now, Nate, and I'm going to invite you to just take a few seconds and just review the board and see what ideas your teammates here or your classmates or workshop mates put up there, and use what they put up there as a way of stimulating new ideas, right? Let the ideas of others stimulate more ideas, and get those 2 or 3 ideas up on the board, if you would, please. And here's the second or third invite to share out loud with us some of those ideas. Any volunteers?
John, I've got a build. Playing paper, rock, scissors that made me think of maybe we could modify the game. They'll turn it into alien astronaut puppy, and we'll go from there.
Great. Thanks for jumping in there and doing that build. Awesome.
You're welcome.
Yeah, so what Nate did there is he ran with that one guideline, which is about making connections. That is, there's a guideline that allows for people to come up with new ideas and make connections with the ideas of others. But it's a nice way of also listening to each other's ideas, sort of like listening, so to speak. If you were all saying it out loud, that will be another way of making connections. So great, thank you so much for engaging in that. And one of the things that I enjoy about this activity is that you see the energy just change, right? There was a couple of folks, once you started sharing these ideas, you started to feel comfortable. And I also noticed some laughter. And that's precisely some of the aspects of what we're trying to do to build a climate within the virtual space or even in the physical space, just to give people, again, a signal of what kind of workshop and what kind of classroom the instructors are going to run. Because this sends very powerful messages, right? You start getting the community to start building on each other. You start building, again, that teamwork, right? And people are starting to figure out, how this is going to evolve as the semester or the workshop goes through its day or its half a day. And so what you allow yourselves to write here and what we allow for you to write down on this idea as you start to internalize deferred judgment and strive for as many ideas as possible is really, it speaks to this notion of setting up a climate, right? That's conducive to people's thinking, it's conducive to people's learning, and certainly conducive to one's creativity.
Yes, and in addition, I'll build on that, John. Not only do you set those conditions, and I think this kind of an energizer is a great way to do that, but you have to think of yourself as a facilitator. You are now the steward of that energy throughout the rest of the session, and in addition to the follow-on work or follow-on, whatever follow-up is going to be involved here, whatever those commitments are. So thinking of yourself as an energy manager, because not only do you need an energizer to kick off a session, but there's going to be points during a session, especially if it's like we're talking a full day or a multi-day workshop, you're going to have to be keenly aware of the energy levels in the room and then call time out from time to time and have energizers in your back pocket. So you're pivoting from your agenda in recognition or in honor of a low dip in energy of your participants, and you're calling time out, injecting an energizer in order to get their juices flowing again, and then digging back into content and process. You know what I mean? So it's a great example. And not only are you responsible for this up front, but I think a skilled facilitator is constantly scanning for when the right time is to inject throughout the day or throughout a program, et cetera.
Absolutely. And if I could build another benefit to this, Nate, and for the audience here, is that it's not uncommon to set sort of like norms for those of you that have been doing this for a while, the kind of norms that you want set up and the kind of mindset that you want people to bring into the workshop or to the classroom. And so I will use these warm-ups strategically. So it may not be the same one that you see here. It could be some other kind of warm-up. And I use those warm-ups as a way of seeing if folks are truly internalizing those group norms or the kind of learning norms. And so, you know, Nate said the timeout. Well, I don't hesitate to do a timeout and check why people aren't bringing to life those norms, right? Because people may not be accustomed to thinking or operating or learning in this way. And so that requires an adjustment, that requires a transition for folks. And you want to let people know, no, I really mean it in terms of these norms and the kind of mindset I want people to bring into the workshop or the classroom. So this allows me to do these indirect feedback loops to make sure that people are internalizing it. And they're not, I intervene and I get into some discussion about why are they not actually exercising the norms they agreed to for this workshop with the classroom.
Now, John and I wanted to ask, so as we prepared for this, we talked a little bit about some of the community members for Agitare are brand new to this, to facilitation. And so a lot of them have spent most or if not all of their facilitation experience in the virtual space. We talked about the virtual versus face-to-face. I'd like to get you to talk about a little bit of those indicators and behaviors that you're looking at and how that's changed now from going from a face-to-face setting and into a virtual setting.
Well, so actually this warm-up activity, that's our way of stimulating what we were doing face-to-face. So just imagine that folks can you have these small breakout rooms. So you have maybe 5 to 7 folks in each of the tables, right? And each of the tables have set up, they have their own flip chart paper. They might have their own whiteboard space that they can move around, or they can have flip chart paper that's put up on the wall. Imagine that these papers or these wall space have the virtual sticky notes, you know, they're working off a whiteboard, or they have flip chart paper and you have these Post-its and they have the smelly markers. And so what you see here is a simulation of what we were doing in the classroom, you know, so that's what it would look like, you know, if you were in an actual face-to-face classroom. I would also add that to add to the climate, what we would do is when people come into the classroom or wherever the workshop is being held, as they walk in, you have items that are on the table. And those items can be directly related to an activity that you have designed, or it could be for allowing people to fidget. So people like to work with their hands, and we allow people for what we call this out thinking, that it's really, it's not realistic to get people to 100% pay attention to what you're saying. So we allow some people some space to either play with Play-Doh or play with pipe cleaners, or have this adult coloring book where there's like a maze or some kind of whatever they can draw, and they got colored pencils. That's on the table, but that also speaks to creating an environment that allows people for a more enhanced and augmented learning, you know, so.
Yeah, I think, so I'll build on that too, and just say that by having those items visibly or sort of like available, I think it sets a tone for the kind of behavior you're looking for, or what this workshop's going to be about. And I think it also gives you an interesting read on who you have in your sessions, because we'll find participants who will stare at a box of Legos that's sitting on top of their tabletop for a full day without ever thinking that it's okay to pop the lid off and play with those things. they're waiting for explicit permission to do so, which I think gives you as a facilitator an interesting read on what kind of support that person might need in order to feel like they can engage in imaginative thinking or whatever kind of thinking you need them to be doing at the time, right? So by having those ideational prompts or those kinesthetic support kind of mechanisms on your tables there in front of participants, not only do you give them a chance to think with their hands, but then also as a facilitator, it gives you a data point to work with in terms of people's comfort level and where they're at. And it's also kind of an interesting implicit assessment of an organizational culture as well. So if you're working in a military unit and that unit, no one's touching any of the stuff on the tables, it might give you a little bit of a feeling for what kind of a shop that is. Whereas you'll find other ones where they rip the lid off and just start jamming right away. You're like, okay, these guys need, or these gals, whatever, need less hand-holding or less support right now, right? So you can take the temperature in the room by looking at how people engage with the tools you use on the tabletop.
Yeah, I love that insight. I just wanted to add this, that reminds me of the whole factor of, you know, as a facilitator, your role is basically to create and hold space for something to occur. And that requires there to be boundaries at the front and back, right? And within this space, there are specific rules and norms, and you have to know what those norms ought to be for different phases of, you know, what's happening within that interaction. And so you have to be able to observe when people are violating those norms, and how to reinforce, no, actually we're in a playful space here, or no, we're in a serious deliberative space here, right? And that's why that's also why I like to alternate between energy modes. You know, you talk about managing energy. One of the best ways to get people to a really high energy state is by ramping up from a low energy state. It's not by trying to maintain high energy for the entirety of the thing, right? So yeah, excellent.
Thanks for that.
There are just as many times where we might call time out and do a reflection exercise, or a pair up and debrief with another person, and then, you know, bring those insights back to a group, or a silent sort of individual level ideation exercise, in order to make sure that introverts or people who have a different way of expressing their creativity are having space in order to contribute, for sure. There's a couple of real good questions in the chat that are starting to pop up. Before we get to those though, John, I've got one for you.
Yeah.
This one always comes up when I'm talking to people who want to facilitate, or they're starting to structure agendas for their first courses or their first workshops. Energizers that are in content, or should energizers be content agnostic or content neutral? What say you, sir?
My tendency is to use warm-ups in the beginning that's much more content related. However, my response to you is to use both, you know, and people like that. So this is back to Dana's point, you know, how do you lift the energy, right? And sometimes I tend to use the one to lift the energy that Dana speak to. That's much more on the non-content related, you know, and there's so many things out there. I noticed there's a post around activities and what are some ideas. And so what I'm looking to do is I will, by the end of this session, I'll save the chat in case we don't get to your questions and comments, and we'll use Miro as a means to add more resources. There's already, I'll lead you there towards the end, where we've already put 3 documents, 3 files, but we'll start to add more to that area based on your questions when you're seeking resources. So there's another one that comes to mind, and thanks for that question, Nate. John, I'm sorry, Jonathan mentioned about how do you get feedback, you know, how do you measure the temperature? And so there's a couple things. One, immediately in a virtual world, I like using the reactions to let people to have them indicate to me how they're feeling about the content, whether they understand it, how do they, you know, with their reactions. The other thing, which is much more long-term, is how crucial it is for a facilitator or instructor to build up trust, where people can feel comfortable in sharing their thoughts. So here's something that I do, is that in Blackboard, for example, I have access to a roster and people's photographs, right? They upload those photographs. So as people start to make their way and get settled into the classroom or the virtual classroom, I've already taken the time to memorize or connect the name to their photograph, right? And so when someone raises their hand, well, it's easy in Zoom because their names are there. Or if the name's not fully written out, I'll still remember the photograph, right? But in a face-to-face, there's really a nice touch when someone raises their hand and you use their name. It surprises them, but I also let them know that what I've done beforehand is I studied the roster and their photographs, because people really appreciate that. That's really building a climate of trust. And, and people will test your integrity with regard to you inviting them to give you feedback. I don't wait for the end of the workshop to hand out a course evaluation or workshop evaluation. I'm constantly doing check-ins. And that's also sending a very important signal. And then people are testing integrity to see if you're going to respond to the feedback that they're giving you.
I love that so much. We sometimes talk about that as the gas factor, the give a shit factor. Like if you're a workshop participant and your facilitator's taking the time to memorize or put your face and your name, and like that person knows you already when you just walked in the door, that says to me, wow, this guy or this person cares, right? This isn't a regular workshop. This is going to be something different, and I'm automatically engaged and turned on, and I want to be a part of this. I think there's something that strikes me. I don't remember where I heard it first, but in an educational context, the easiest thing to learn is something that you almost know already. So if we take that principle to be true, a facilitator can then, if you have access to people's names and their pictures and also their bios and their background, you can start to paint a picture in your mind about who this person is and what they already know. And if you know what they already know, all of your inside moves as a facilitator, or when you're debriefing or you're sort of helping to make connections or bounce ideas between participants, you can be connecting those talking points to what people already know in order to help them get to what they almost know or what they're almost ready to know next, right? And I think there's just so much power in not speaking or sort of delivering content in a way that sort of checks the box of your learning objectives or your SLOs from your curriculum sheet, but instead helping people identify it and understand and get what they need out of it. Like that's what resonates more with people over time. And that's what gets callbacks and why you're asked not to facilitate one thing, but you become like the go-to facilitator for that organization in perpetuity, right? It's the gas factor. It's, did you show up cold or did you put in the work ahead of time? And to make sure that people had a really bespoke kind of customized experience, that it was like the chocolate on the pillow moment in the hotel, right? You didn't have to do it, but you did it anyways to make sure that it was special. You know what I mean?
That's cool. So it's great to see that the community is now jumping in there and sharing their expertise and some ideas. And that's exactly what we wanted to have happen. So thank you for doing that. I saw here about a question around, well, what are those virtual toys, right? And so I would say something that comes to mind is, there's this in the field of the scientific study of creativity, there's this thinking around what we call in and out thinking, meaning that when you're listening to us, for example, the likelihood that you're listening 100% is not, it's not strong, right? So there are times when you may phase out and think about your to-do list, what have you. So we do what's called in and out thinking. And so that is, you take a piece of paper, you write, you draw a line in the middle. On the left-hand side are your thoughts directly related to what you're hearing from Nate and I and from the organizers. On the right-hand side, this is where we are permitting you to actually write down anything that's not related to the content. So one of the things I will share with you is that in Miro, we actually created, actually was shared in college. This is a college in Canada that actually created this nice booklet, and it's open to the public, where they have the adults coloring side, and then on the right-hand side is the in and out thinking. And so I would do is let people share with us how their adult, coloring went through, just share some of your drawing, and we can take pictures of it and put it up on a board on Miro or in Mural. Another thing is we do this exercise called Picasso in a bag. And I was talking about this to Nate just the other day. And it's getting people to do this exercise where they have a white piece of paper inside a grocery bag. And there's very strict guidelines, which is use a Sharpie, you put your hand inside that bag, and you have to sketch out your partner. But here's the thing, you cannot lift your Sharpie, you cannot look inside the grocery bag. And once you start drawing, right? You have to try to use up enough space. So it's designed to get people to sketch their partner so that it looks like a Picasso. So what I do is I get folks to take a photograph of their partner's sketch. And so once I have all those pictures, right, I put it up on a mural, and now you see the group picture, and it's their Picasso template. So these are kind of, it's sort of like a toy, but it's actually leveraging their drawing skills. It's also trying to create a community with the members of the workshop or the class.
Hey, two quick builds here that I think get after some of the questions in the comments too. First off, to build on the virtual toy thing, I think your best bet here is actually to have participants leverage what they have in their immediate environment. So your job as a facilitator is to have them bring artifacts into the session that means something to them. And now you've got your crowdsourcing, effectively like participant sourcing toys, because you don't have them in the virtual world. So you lean on what's available to participants in their immediate space. Neat storytelling opportunity too, because they can tell you why they picked what they picked, what it means to them, etc. Next one from Kristen about building a diagram of the room. Yeah, absolutely. Anything you can get to help people identify themselves, bring their sort of self to the session in a way that's visible and persistent in the room. So then they're not only facilitators can get to know them, but participants as well as the session unfolds. Absolutely. And then to Melody, communicating barriers explicitly. My go-to tactic here is something that came about when I first started teaching in the business school, and that was, don't show up on day one with a syllabus that's printed out in PDF form and concretized. Show up with a Google Doc and say, let's talk about what makes a great freaking class, or what makes a great learning or educational experience. Or go the other route and have some fun with it and say, what was the worst educational experience you've ever had in your life? And let's list all those things out and let people just get it out. And then say, okay, what if we reversed all those assumptions or all those kind of key data points about what made that terrible for you? We would then have a list of things that were really incredible, right? Or potentially really exciting. So start from that space where you're crowdsourcing the syllabus, you're crowdsourcing the agenda. You have a direction you need to get into based off kind of, the title of the course or what you're there for, right? What people expected to sign up for. But how you get there can be completely shared with the participants and shaped around what is going to be comfortable for them, not so comfortable that they don't learn or stretch, but at least you get a feel. You're taking their temperature and understanding what they value, right? As opposed to showing up and saying, this is how it is because I'm the person, right? It's my course, I wrote it or whatever, right? So I'll pause there, but that the connection there to explicitly communicating the barriers, my recommendation is crowdsourcing the barriers and getting people to agree. Effectively, you're creating like a workshop contract in terms of how you will behave or what the expectations are, not just facilitator to participants, but peer-to-peer, participant to participant in the session as well.
Yeah, I love that insight, and as it's something that I now do as a rule after seeing how the Cynefin Center runs their facilitated workshops when they're training Cynefin groups in their base camps. They start out with that. All right, let's make a contract together. What are the boundaries that we have to respect in one another in order to make this as positive and effective a learning experience as possible? And then at any point, if somebody crosses those boundaries, it's not, hey, I told you you can't do that. It's, let's return to what some of the boundaries are that you all established and see if we're all kind of sticking with those. It's way more powerful if they're co-created. So yeah, I love that approach.
Nate, you had mentioned something about, I think you alluded to different styles and different perhaps learning styles and cognitive styles. And so it made me think that one of the things you can do is, rather than saying, what questions do you have and just waiting, what I'll do is I'll have them break out into groups, or at least before they break out in groups, start writing all the questions you have with regard to what I've shared. Or what I'll do is ask them as I'm presenting this content to you, I want you to think of all the possible questions that you can make or give to me with regard to this content. Then I get them to work into small groups and then start sharing those questions and then select some key questions they want to share with me, and so it gives people, it seems to level the playing field. but it's amazing how you get all these wonderful questions. You can just, I mean, you can really consume a lot of good quality time in responding to questions that people identify as, here's a quick question, here's a key question for us that we want an answer to, you know? So it's just changing things up. And here I am accommodating a certain learning style or even a cognitive style where people are much more naturally to ask questions, you know, than coming up with ideas. Ask me the questions then.
Yeah, I'll jump in real quick here and say I think as a facilitator, it's really important to step back before you start thinking about what kind of exercises we're going to do, what methods we're going to use. You've got to figure out why are we doing this in the first place? Who's asking for this? Why are they asking for this? What have they done before? Is this a problem-solving session? Are they just looking to share information? Is this a communication thing? Is there a decision expected? Like, there's so many questions on the front end of a session that as a facilitator, you have to get answers to these data points or these clarification items from your client or your stakeholders in order to craft an agenda that doesn't meet your needs or your preferences, but instead helps the group get to what they need to get to, right? So one of those things that's going to pop up too is, and will make a massive difference in your sessions, the way they go, will be, is this the first time this group has worked together? And are they process aware or process newbies, right? Like, if you're dealing, like, your session goes fantastically different if you're working with people who are familiar with each other and they're familiar with the process. Your left-right limits in terms of what you can do with that group have just like maxed out, right? You'll see a massive difference in outcomes. If it's a brand new group, they don't have trust, they don't know each other, and they don't know what methods and processes you're going to be working them through, you're going to have to really temper expectations, pace the session, clarify more, invite more clarifying questions. So to manage, you just have to manage that and facilitate that very differently. So you got to find out where on the continuum of those two extremes you're going to be at with your session, and then let that, I think, help contextualize and inform the structure and the activities that you tee up for folks.
Nice.
Yeah, so to make sure you don't go to coffee and then not come back, we're going to shift this session. So it's a 5-minute bio break, and then we'll return and do an exercise that involves or that requires your participation. And then we're going to lean on the wisdom in the room, so to speak, like any good facilitator should. And we're going to make this more about you in the second half of the session. So hope to see you back here in 5 minutes.
Man, this is going great so far. I did not expect to take notes, but we still got started and I was like, oh man, where's my notepad? I need to write some stuff down. This is awesome.
I bet you say that to all the guests, Michael.
All right, folks. So we're going to invite you now to take out a piece of paper or pen or pencil, if you would, please. You can have a notebook or a notepad or whatever is convenient for you to write down some things. And so what we're going to do, and Nate referred to this, is that this would be great to leverage the experience and of the group. And so we're going to work towards that. So once we get through these series of questions, there's one particular question we're going to ask you to respond by sharing your thoughts and some of your ideas into Miro, where you might have seen on the right-hand side. So these sets of questions come from this methodology called appreciative inquiry, which in its essence, it's about studying what works well, right? It's identifying those experiences or those moments that you could easily celebrate because this is something that you're very proud of. And so I'm going to have you reflect back on an experience where you were involved in teaching. And if this is the first time for you getting involved with teaching and in training, we're going to ask you to think of your role as a student. So, but this question is set up now, and I'll give you a series of questions. So here's where I'm leveraging this methodology, right? We want you to think about a time when you are most engaged, alive, and energized while teaching a course or a workshop. Now, if you've not done that, if you don't have that experience, then take it from the point of view of being a student and think about what you really engaged and alive and energized in a classroom setting or in a workshop. Okay, so let me give you a few seconds just to think about a time when you were most engaged, alive, and energized while teaching a course or workshop. What was the high point of the course for you? So think about that workshop and that course that for you was you were most engaged, alive, and energized. What was the high point? And write that down, if you would, on that piece of paper. Now, these things that you're writing down, it's going to be for your eyes only, with the exception of question number 7. Okay, here's the next question. Who or what made this a successful endeavor for you? And how did that come about? What did that look like? So again, reflecting back on this experience that you identified, that was where you were most engaged, alive, and energized when you were teaching this course or workshop, who or what made this successful endeavor for you? And we welcome if this question quite doesn't, if you want to modify the question a little bit so that the question is much more meaningful for you, then of course you're free to do that. Okay, take a few more seconds to complete your remaining thought on this question. 2 questions. With reference to, and then I want you to choose one, whether it was dialogue that happened in this course or workshop, it was an engagement, you were teaching, and it was teaching and learning, or perhaps there was an assessment involved. What did you most value about your course or workshop? And write that down, if you would, please. And again, if this short list, if there's something missing here, you want to go to identifying something else, then feel free to add that. Okay, take a few more seconds. And we'll have these slides in Miro, so you'll have a set of slides, or sorry, a series of questions rather. Here's the next question. With reference to this short list, with reference to relationships, the positive environment, or the collaboration that you saw happen in your course or workshop, what did you most value about the course or workshop that you taught? And write that down, if you would, please. Okay, take a few seconds to capture your last, your thoughts here for this question before I move on to the next one. Okay, here's the next question. With reference to the following, whether it was personal growth, reflection, or deeper learning, what did you most value about your workshop or the workshop or course that you delivered? And write those down, if you would, please. And I want you to think again on, the things that really helped to make this a super high point that got you on this natural high. And here's the next question. If you had 3 wishes to improve the health and vitality of this course that you identified for yourself, the one that you taught or delivered, what would they be? And if you would, write those down. Again, this is for your eyes only, with the exception of the next question. Now, of course, if you have more than 3 wishes, you are free to write more down. Again, if you had 3 wishes to improve the health and vitality of this course, your course, what would they be? Okay, take a few more seconds to capture that last wish. And here is the last question. With regard to this course that you identified as one that was a point of pride, that really got you on this natural high, what have you learned from this course to ensure your ongoing success with other workshops, with other courses? Again, what have you learned from this course that you identified, as a high point, where you felt engaged, alive, and energized? What did you learn from this course to ensure your ongoing success? And so as you start thinking about this and capturing some thoughts, we're also going to invite you to go back to that Miro board. And on the right-hand side where we did that warm-up involving the extraterrestrials, there is another set of Post-its there. And here's what Nate refers to how we want to leverage the community so we can learn from each other. And if you would, take as many thoughts that come to mind for that question number 7 as it relates to your particular workshop. And I want you to write those things down, one per Post-it, and write it in a way so that we can understand it and we can actually benefit from these things that you captured for question number 7. So I'll stop sharing. And if you would, make your way to the Miro board on the right-hand side. And I'll share the screen on the Miro board as well. All right, great. So you'll see here on the right-hand side, the green colored Post-its. Good. You're already making your way there and you're populating this. And again, this is what's going to be great about this is that we're all leveraging our experience, our techniques with the learning community. And so one of the things that I'm going to invite you to do that as you think about what you're writing down on Post-it, I want you to write it down in a way that it gives it enough detail for folks, or at least understanding, so that folks, if someone were to read it and say, hey, yeah, I get that idea. Absolutely. I can run with it.
And it may be helpful if this is your first time on Miro. In the lower right-hand side, there's a zoom function that'll help you dial into the board a little bit more in case the font is a little rough on your eyes from afar. It's sort of the default position of the board. Exactly.
Feel free to mention tools, techniques, activities, exercises, other warm-ups. Remember, we had talked about the ecosystem, meaning that when you're looking to prepare for a course, you have this notion of the climate that you're trying to set up in the virtual space or in the physical space. What is your pedagogy and the processes you use with regard to any activity and how you design courses? What kind of outcomes you're trying to reach, or what kind of participant mindset you're trying to build up, what you're trying to produce with regard to the outcome of some of your activities.
John, I'm so excited. There's so many great things popping up here from these participants.
Oh, that's great. This is something that I hope we can still keep open, so you can always come back and add more to this, because there's already been some things that were shared during the break, but this is exactly how we wanted to go. So that's cool. This is awesome.
So this will be effectively, we've got here like a crowdsourced list of all the key drivers of meaningful experiences in their peak workshop or course library, which is fantastic.
No, I love this. This is the first time that I've actually sat down and reflected on some of my best facilitation experiences. And
I'm so glad you said that. I'm sorry, go ahead, I cut you off, go ahead.
Yeah, no. And it's just interesting how when you answer those questions one by one, you dig deeper into all those great things that happened. And then now sharing all those in one place, it's such a great resource. So thank you.
Absolutely, and that's exactly what we wanted to do is one, we need to take time to take stock of what we do well and celebrate it, and then make some of the things explicit so that we can continue using that in an ongoing basis. And so the second part, as Nate mentioned, this is crowdsourcing. And so we're trying to share with what we do well. with the community.
I
All right,
think
let's
it can
take
be
a, go
tempting. I'm sorry, go ahead.
ahead, Nate, please.
It's a 10-cent wisdom here, but it can be tempting to spend a disproportionate amount of your time and energy trying to compensate or upskill in areas that you think you're weak or that you feel insufficient in. I think there's an equally valid argument and potentially even more compelling one, which would be to get a coach for that which you already do well, or find stuff that you're already that energizes you and you love doing, and find a way to get that even better at that. And it's amazing because when you're focusing on that and upskilling in those areas that you're already good at, some of those weaknesses or blind spots tend to stop mattering as much, just as a function of you not focusing on them as much. Now, obviously, you got to take every situation, awareness is key here, that doesn't apply in every situation, but in general, it's worth asking the question, I think, of yourself.
I'm so glad you said that, Nate, because that's one of the very important underlying principle to appreciative inquiry, is that if you identify the source of success, right, baked in them are the solutions. So now it's back to what you're saying is, all right, now that you see the solutions baked into stories of your own success, how might you augment them? How might you do more of them? And
this work. So this is the premise too. It's not just at the individual level about you, but this is applied in organizational contexts. I know, John has experience with this methodology. I used to work for a firm that did only appreciative inquiry, and they specialized in particular, strategic planning for nonprofit organizations. And it was their single method, which I had some issues with. And at the same time, they were really good at it. And organizations always got value out of their process. So focusing on that which organizations do well already and figuring out how do we do even more of that which we do well had a funny way of mitigating, I guess, some of the concerns or issues that they were having.
That's cool. So let's take just a few more seconds to finish up the remaining thought that you were completing or putting onto the post-it, and then we'll resume with other things and tips and suggestions that we wanted to share with you for the remaining time that we have together.
Hey, John, may I inject a pivot?
Yeah, absolutely.
An inside move, invitation for our participants. If you're looking at the Miro board still, would anyone, I know we said this is sort of for you, your experience, your exercise. Is there anyone who'd be willing to talk about one that they put up that was just really, it's like the peak contribution from you or your experience? Yeah, Ryan, I see you raising your hand. Would you be willing to share?
Yeah, one of the ones I threw up there was don't let your self-doubt inhibit your passion. So I struggle with, I guess, feeling like an imposter or underqualified because I'm still very early in this journey. But it's something that I am passionate about. And I think that I can sometimes try to overcompensate or get in my own way because I'm not sure if I'm coming across as like an expert or a professional in this field like other people do. So that was one that I try to remind myself, like, to be a little gracious, that there's no right way to do it and there's no wrong way to do it. You just learn as you go. So
real talk, buddy. I'm about 300 to 320 sessions or workshops that I facilitated in the last 15 years. I keep a running count, try to do an AAR on every one of them. I still feel that way sometimes. So I think it's completely natural. I know a lot of people who have that. You're never done. You're never up in a facilitator with a period at the end of it. It's always, the semicolon or whatever, right? The ellipses is always there, right? John, do you want to build on that?
Yeah. So one of the things I want to share with you, and this help go up the learning curve. What I tend to do is challenge myself by putting myself in a domain that is quite frightening for me, right? So someone says, hey, you know what, we're running this session on biomimicry. We're running a session on process mapping. And I have no clue, I've never done them before, but let me go try it out anyway and see how it goes. As long as my clients or my stakeholders know that I'm going to figure this out, I'm going to give it a go. Let me tell you, you're adding so much more to your repertoire, your toolbox, and your experience, but it requires a little bit of openness to being vulnerable. Well, let me tell you, you really get much more experience and you start moving yourself up that learning curve quite fast.
Absolutely. That's a great point. I know we've got some other facilitators who've been doing this stuff for a while. Anybody want to jump in with a comment, an observation, or a build?
So I'd like to say that one of the things that I really noticed on quickly being around a couple of facilitators that I find to be very intriguing is the vocabulary. When I first became, and I don't know if anybody else feels this way, especially Ryan, if you're new to the community, you begin to start to hear some similar vocabulary. And one of the things I saw on the board that I was happy to see is the yes and. Obviously, that's a collaborative way to continue and build on a story, from what some people say. And then I've also heard a lot of I love that, and, or I really like what you said here, and I really enjoyed that. I really enjoyed that about, one, the facilitation, and how if you bring in that sort of vocabulary, it kind of sets the behaviors and the values within the facilitation. And then that kind of opens up into, okay, well, maybe that helps out set those bookends that we talked about, this space that the facilitator is there to create to ensure that this something happens. And if anything is going to happen, if we inject this vocabulary, then it'll be collaborative in nature, and then connections will start to be made. And then all the great things of facilitation can start from there. So I just think that vocabulary is so powerful.
If I may, I want to share something to build off of what you said in terms of these inside moves. And so let me just share with you. So this is the experiential learning cycle. And it's really a set of questions to drive people in the classroom or in your workshop to engage in conversation. So you do an activity or what have you, and then to get the most out of that learning, here's what I start off with: is what's going on? Tell me, how do you feel about that? What did you know? What did you need to know when you're doing this activity? So you can pretty much select the kind of questions you want to ask to start off the conversation. This part is really about experiencing. It's just opening up for people to engage in conversation. And then it starts taking a scaffolding approach. So one is, all right, tell me about what you just saw or what you experienced. Now I want you to start volunteering and sharing some more, where I'm going to use that as a foundation for them to engage in much more sharing. Tell me, how'd you feel about that? Did anybody else have the same experience? Who reacted differently, etc. From there, you're going into interpreting. Let's try to get much more meaning from that activity. And here's your set of questions. How did you account for that? What does that mean to you? How is that significant? How is that good or bad? And so I have no problem having these set of questions in my notes. I don't mind flipping through that, and so eventually you start getting familiar with the questions and then drawing out the conversation. So the one watch out is that you start using this experiential learning cycle and your time can fly. All right. Generalizing. So now that you've done some meaning making, you've made some sense of this. How might we generalize this so that you can draw and pull from this and go into your context or other people's context? So you're starting to move towards more application, and here's really the last set of grounding everything that they came from that activity. I could have easily gone through this with the warm-up that we did. I could have easily, and I could have gone through this set of questions with regard to doing the appreciative inquiry mindfulness activity. It can apply for any particular activity. And so we'll have this in the Miro, so you can have these set of questions available for you. And that speaks to what you're saying, Cus, with regard to facilitating and asking questions and letting people do the learning and the driving around that.
Yeah, this board is so exciting. I'm still reading some of these, and there's just so many great little tips in here. And it really speaks to, we keep talking about the sports analogy about the basketball player in the paint, and the little foot tweak that shifts his body and throws the defender off, and these are absolutely all those little inside moves on stickies right here in front of us. So very cool.
I'll throw an inside move out anecdote. I had a client once when I was running the Delhi Museum Innovation Lab. And the client, the intent of their session was that this organization wanted to get better at challenging assumptions. So they wanted to get better at, they were kind of going through a rebirth as an organization, but also wanted to find new opportunities in their industry, which required them to be sort of fluent in question storming or sort of identifying good probing questions that would open up some new space for them to think about their industry or kind of where they were headed. And I said, okay, we can do that. So we sort of brought some of our more standard toolkit to the party first, but we came across an option or an idea that I think really resonated and worked well at lunch. And I bring this story up in particular because lunch may not be on your radar as a facilitator or as an architect of a course or a workshop as being an opportunity space for you to do content. Like most people, you just put in lunch and then let people go and do their thing. However, in this environment, we had control over lunch because they were getting food from the kitchen inside the museum. They were eating lunch inside the space, right? So we were able to control the menu, we were able to control the timing, et cetera. So what we ended up doing was in recognition of what their desired outcomes were for the session, we said, hey, I wonder if we could sneak in a little assumption challenging tactic into their lunch. So they had ordered salmon, and that's what they wanted to have for lunch. So what we did was we had the chef prepare the salmon just like he always does, prepare those sweet potato fries just like he always does, right? The nice little sides that go with the salmon dish. But we had an intern run out to Burger King the night before and get Burger King bags. So we stuffed all those Burger King bags with this high-end salmon and sweet potato fry, dish. And we brought the lunch out and had them all visibly on the tables lined up on the side of the room 10 minutes before lunch or, something like that, before the break was supposed to start. So everyone could get a good look at these Burger King bags, right? And the chef and the client and my boss at the time, we all stepped back and just listened to the groans and the grumbles and the, what the hell, Burger King, right? Like we paid for, we're having Burger King, blah, blah, blah. We just let that happen, right? Didn't say a peep. And then people got up, went, got their bags, sat down at the table, and we just scanned the room with our eyes, looking for those aha moments. And you saw everyone's face light up or connect when they were like, wait a minute, when did Burger King start serving salmon, right? Like, did Burger King do sweet potato? Oh. And they'd turn and look at us and we'd be like, nah. Gotcha.
Wow, that's really, really cool.
So what John and I really want to do is encourage you to look at all the touch points of that facilitated journey, from prior to the session happening to the post-session follow-up, everything in between, including the breaks. These are all there for you as a facilitator to help shape that experience for and with your participants. So just that's an inside move that comes to mind.
There we have. So let me just share with you some of the thinking that has evolved in my head as it involves how I run workshops nowadays. I used to be someone that tried to pack so much into my agenda because you're generous and you want to cover so much. I find myself now doing less and just expanding the conversation around one or two things that I want them to walk away. So I find myself in my head saying, all right, what's the one thing I really want folks to walk away with, right? And then I design around that. So here you have a slide that we've used in the field of scientific study of creativity. This comes from a scholar who was a mathematician, but also got into the world of, or the field of, scientific study of creativity. And so as a mathematician, she came up with a formula to define creativity. So you see there, C stands for the creativity, It equals into a function of attitude. Think of attitude as someone's mindset, meaning that they're open-minded, they're curious, they have high tolerance for ambiguity, uncertainty. And then you got these three variables there, right? One has to do with knowledge. That knowledge, you need information, and that information come from the many years that you have from experience, going to school, what have you. You need knowledge as a way of making new connections that lead into imagination. So imagination is another aspect of this definition. And of course, imagination can also be leveraged not only for generating many, many options, but you can leverage imagination as a way of trying to evaluate your thinking and your options. Right. So when I first got introduced to this, people were telling me about this definition in just the way that I just showed you now. So what Nate and I do now, we say to ourselves, how do we make content come alive? And so I asked myself one time, how do I make this formula come alive? And so what I did was I showed folks a documentary, not the whole thing. It was like 2 minutes here and 2 minutes there. And it involved this guy who's Dr. Lee Cronin, who's a chemist out of University of Glasgow. I met him when we were working with NASA, and we brought him in as a provocateur. And so what I did was had people say, look, I'm going to show you a documentary. I'm just going to show you 4 minutes. I want you to look at this formula, and I want you to identify each of these variables in this documentary. So that is to say, I want you to put yourself in the mind of Dr. Lee Cronin in terms of his mindset. I want you to identify how he brings in his knowledge base. I want you to look at how he, with some of his thinking, some of his ideas, and how he goes about evaluating it. And then what we'll do is, so I see how I set up that video. I give people something to look for in that documentary, which is this formula. After they watch the video, then they go back into small groups and share what they picked up in that video. Ultimately, what I want to do to bring to life is this piece here, which is the K here, which is the knowledge. That is to say that knowledge can be a double-edged sword. You need knowledge to feed into creativity, but it can also trap you because your years of training can trap you into that kind of thinking. And so we had brought in Lee Cronin to provoke the scientists at this conference, these scientists from NASA. And here's the point we were trying to get from this particular, this video. Lee Cronin makes this argument, and he did it in front of these scientists. He says, look, we as a race tend to be very arrogant, very chauvinistic, because what makes you think that that life outside our planet is carbon-based? Because if you think that life is carbon-based outside our planet, you may not find it, because the group we were working with is this group that were brought together to find ways in which they can identify life outside of their planet. So we brought him as a provocateur, and we were trying to get them to actually get outside that trap, because their training for so many years is life is carbon-based. And so this is how we were able to bring this formula to life. We give them a video, spot these things in the video, let's have a conversation. And let me tell you, something like this can easily go for a half an hour in conversation, especially when you bring in this learning cycle. So there's like 2 or 3, inside moves.
Absolutely applicable too in the defense and security space, because I think there's still a lot of people who are expecting the next war to look like the last war, or Saddam lines up the tanks in the desert for you, or expecting a kinetic kind of a thing, whereas we're seeing more competition and more action in non-kinetic information space and cyberspace and things like that, right? So non-traditional forms of competition. Yet military organizations, we still see them stuck looking for carbon-based life forms, right? So we could absolutely apply this approach in order to help stretch or sort of push on those boundaries as provocateurs. And it's interesting. So as a facilitator, there's a fine line here, because you kind of want to sometimes play that role of a provocateur, but also you need to be neutral, right? Like you need to be, you don't have a dog in the fight, so to speak, right? Terrible metaphor, but you need to be careful not to violate the trust of your participants. And at the same time, you owe it to them to push them a little bit sometimes. So I think that's something that, you got to find what that line looks like for you in the context of that session, the trust and relationship you have with those participants, et cetera. But those are some of those interesting dynamics that, maybe we'll have to have a following conversation about that some other time, sort of the nuanced the gray zone of facilitation, if you will, right?
I'd like to flip it real quick before we get off. Does anybody want to share anything, the favorite part of this session that they learned, inside move that they feel is going to improve their facilitation skills, or something they're going to try next?
The Burger King story was great. And to tell you, like, in terms of the assumptions, I'm definitely gonna look to include elements of surprise like that for sure. I think that's a great pattern interrupt. Well played.
Yeah, I'm appreciative of Dr. Cabra's advice, engaging in areas that scare you or make you uncomfortable. I think that's I have been shying away from that. I'm not ready to commit yet, but I just need to, I don't know, commit. So I will at some point in the near future, I hope.
Hey, Ryan, that first step of saying, look, I recognize that and I have it on mind to one day doing that. That's a huge step. So good for you on that.
Yeah, the personal transformation of becoming a facilitator is one that's tough sometimes too, but good on you, Ryan. I hope that you learn some inside moves that help you and the rest of the participants. And Nate, John, it has been such a pleasure working with you to bring this stuff to the community, and we'll leave all these insights on the Miro board. And so if you have the link, those inside moves will remain there. And if you're in our Agitare Slack group, there's a Agitare Fishbowl channel, and the link is always in that channel as well. So before we wrap up, say thank you again, Nate and John, for giving us your time, your energy, and your inside moves.
Pleasure. It's great. Thank you so much. And I do want to say that I did save the chat so I can respond to the questions and then add more content to the Miro board based on those questions. So,
Cuss, Michael, Team Agitare, thank you so much. Appreciate you. All the participants, everybody showed up, those familiar faces. Kai, good to see you. Christina, I see you in there. Some new names and faces too. Looking forward to seeing y'all in follow-on Agitare sessions. I know I try to catch this thing every month or every 6 weeks or whatever that schedule is. So hopefully we all we'll see more of each other again soon. Keep doing what you're doing.